This is the part 3 and final session of our Minutes with the Minister audio lecture from the Ministry of Spiritology YouTube channel on the topic 3 days and 3 nights. Specifically, we've been talking about the crucifixion and resurrection of the biblical character Jesus Christ and how they do not keep to actual time and real time in its sequence of this being Lent. This is that period. Actually, Easter's actually in just 2 days. Actually, specifically today, we're doing this recording on Good Friday. Yes, it is April 2nd. We know that the Easter Sunday, which follows the first full moon after the vernal equinox for this 2021 year, which was on March 20th specifically. And with that, we know that we are into the planting season, essentially, in the northern hemisphere of the earth that is above the equator. We could say that even those regions that are near the equator, in West Africa also, we've had some climatic conditions that have shifted with the climate change since 2001. Notably, in Cameroon, the Ngemba tribes, of which I'm from, the Bafut tribe, we used to identify rainy seasons as beginning as early as March 15th. But recently, rainy seasons have shifted back as late as even April, even into early May. So I mean, all these things, it's just general, but it's based on an understanding of the movement of what are called celestial bodies, planets, the sun, moon, stars, their comets, their other objects, and just really, the word is celestial bodies. You see it, it's floating as celeste, outer space, essentially. You see it. You have to be someone who's inclined to science. That's why when I say it, I try to think of a term that the average layman, in the context of me knowing that my audience that's definitely going to first get this is us, we are naturalist people, but in our African society, a lot of us may not have had access to the depth of advanced reading to understand some of these basic concepts. You see, so when I use a term that I know is technically scientific, and I'm not sure someone is going to actually grasp it quickly, I become a little bit reluctant. But like I said, yes, spiritology is a science. That's why, if you're going to question what science has to do with what we are talking about, you see it, because we apply study and method consciously to our research of what individuals would look at as religion, but we see in key as spiritual traditions. And spiritual traditions, spirituality is study of human consciousness. You see, of consciousness in general as a manifestation of reality, because universal consciousness is what permeates all of existence, but it has its fractal embodiment inside the physical form of the human being, which is experienced in this three-dimensional form of this body, and that's what we call soul, the embodiment of that fractal consciousness inside of us, which as we come into the earth, it becomes aware from birth. You see it, even from conception to a degree, but the physical form that is going to house it becomes fully aware from birth. And as we do come out of the womb, our integration into the field, the unified field of light and sound and other manifest energies, manifest in 7 dimensions, you see it. It's a whole awakening experience that we go through before we just look at it as learning our ABCs. It's manipulation of sound and intonations to communicate. But we take it so simple, the fact that even if you're born and you're able to see, that you're able to embrace the 7 rays of light and how they refract and reflect off of objects, and you reconstruct, you see, the objective reality outside of you based on the location of the sun generally during the day, to conceive what is the objective reality as it was intended by creative fiat, what we call universal consciousness. You see, all of this is being harmonized in this process of the movement and rotation of the earth around the sun, and what we've been talking about as the sequence of the equinoxes and the solstices, but which our ancestors were able to portray in a symbolic coding in the form of mythologies. And one of them, which was very profound, is the Easter, or the Ishtar, or the Oset, specifically when we want to use the pronunciation of this naturalist phenomena, this naturalist rite, which was commemorated by our ancestors and other naturalist traditions and cultures and tribes in the past, which recognized the earth having a relationship to the sun, which allows us to specifically calculate the planting season when rains are going to reoccur upon the earth every year. And we had to do this routine because I've always pointed out, and I pointed out in one of the other recordings, that naturally human beings to survive as the animal species that we are, survival is based on eating, having shelter, and being able to clothe yourself. You see, shelter also would constitute ideas of protection and defending yourself, but you have to eat. And I mean, naturally you have the settler communities and you have the nomadic hunting communities, but all of it operates around this idea of humans needing to gather food. And as life became more settled in its evolution, we moved away from everyone generally just having knowledge of the rotation and movement of the celestial bodies, and having to definitely apply this knowledge with its precise understanding of which celestial body is pertinent to what. And it's because at times even you see that as mythologies can exist, more people would lean to just an understanding of the symbolic representation of the cosmic phenomena as opposed to really knowing what it means. And that's what's happened as we've come now even into these Greco-Roman times. Specifically, the Roman Vatican priestcraft is to intentionally give a literal interpretation of a mythos and then not give the followers of that spiritual tradition, of that religion, the understanding that that mythological representation is actually a symbolic representation which constitutes the movement of natural phenomena of which the earth is moving around the sun in the precession of the equinoxes and the solstices. And specifically, they calculate their Easter to be on the first Sunday following the first full moon of the annual vernal equinox, which can shift each year depending on how specifically the earth in its rotation synchronizes in its movement with that approximate location in relation to the sun. It could take plane as it's making its 366 degree orbit, or I keep saying yes, it's orbit around the sun. So I mean, it has this galactic element. I know that it might frighten some people, but in spiritology, literally, this is the language that we use. We don't have a Bible. We don't have religious text. Because spiritology, like I said, it's a subject matter. It's not a religion, you see. So in its inspiration, it's been given to me as a calling to divulge to the naturalist community, first on the African continent. We have to prioritize our cultural awareness, you see. And cultural awareness even goes beyond the idea of just religion, which are just belief systems. When we're talking about culture, we're talking about the hand-down behavioral practices of our people. So even our professions, our iron craft, you see, our crafts with not just metallurgy but even wood, our health science craft, evolving even out of our natural medicine sciences. You see, the development of indigenous knowledge is something I want to start with core, but as it would expatiate into so much more if we understood the value of spiritology in any particular culture and how it values our connection to our immediate natural environment, evolving now into the contemporary system, which unfortunately we have to have this incongruence in which the Roman culture and its Christian and its advance and in its disguise behind even capitalism gives that European structure and system as being what is a quote-unquote developed or modernized model which we should be aspiring to. And even when it came to what were the indigenous tribes of the earth, the natural traditions, and it destroyed our shrines, I mean, first moving through the Germanic tribes and others in Europe before coming now to the land called Africas and the lands later called the Americas. You see, that is the conflict that we had even with our spiritual tradition, this insistence that this foreign form called Christianity, which is a representation of an imperial capitalist ancient Roman form, was claiming to be superior to forms which are just equally the exact same thing but packaged with different archetypes and iconography. And it's unfortunate, my people, that this has happened. But at this day and age that we are able to attain enlightenment, to reason it out, that's what it is important of this first audio lecture, these minutes that we are jotting down as even though I'll call them audio minutes for you, since you wouldn't have the time to read them, that we were getting on this discourse in which we've been talking about 3 days and 3 nights, which they claim are used to represent the time, duration, and sequencing between when their mythological icon, Jesus Christ, was supposedly crucified and resurrected. But it's impossible by all of the actual time sequence and history and spiritual traditions like Judaism and the rites that actually compared from the evidence sources. And we have to look at this evidence crucially as participants of the Ministry of Spiritology and patron members, because this is the foundation knowledge that liberates us from being indoctrinated into this Christian system, which keeps all of its followers in that state of what they do called sheep to the shepherds and hypnotized. To see it. It's unfortunate that we have to say it like that, but the way it's projected, and people can be manipulated when they don't understand this knowledge. This is the liberation that we seek when we go looking for what we are calling truth. You see it, because it's apparent, it's as clear as day and night, which we've been talking about, relating all of this to the equinox, because we need to know equality in our days and nights, and equi, and nox, and tying all of this rotation now to our valuing of this, talking about this idea of 3 days and 3 nights, and Friday, and the resurrection, and the Easter. So I have some notes here, actually, that we'll just start rounding up. I see how the time is finally dwindling. You see, that according to the commonly accepted tradition of the church, you see, Jesus was crucified on Friday and was raised from the dead early in the morning on the following Sunday. Now, many readers of the Bible are puzzled to know how the interval between late Friday afternoon and early Sunday morning can be figured out to be 3 days and 3 nights. Has been the essential focus of our discourse. You see. But it seems rather to be 2 nights at first glance, 1 day and a very small portion of another day. The solution of this apparent difficulty, proposed by many commentators, is that a day and a night is simply another way of saying a day, and that the ancient Jews reckoned a fraction of a day as a whole day. There are many persons whom the solution does not altogether satisfy. It seems to be a type of makeshift. I also point out it's technology, essentially. I just want to be very frank. The Bible, if you go through it, you see it, as a scholar or someone who's actually read the text, nowhere says or implies that Jesus was crucified and died on Friday. It says that Jesus was crucified on the day before the Sabbath, and the Bible does not leave us to speculate in regard to which Sabbath is meant in this instant. It was not the day before the weekly Sabbath, that is Friday, but it was the day before the Passover Sabbath, which came this specific year on Thursday. That is to say, the day on which Jesus was crucified was Wednesday. John makes this as clear as day. Jesus was buried just about sunset on Wednesday. 72 hours later, he rose from the grave when the women visited the tomb. Just before dawn in the morning, they found the grave already empty. There is absolutely nothing in favor of a Friday crucifixion, but everything in the scriptures is perfectly harmonized by the Wednesday crucifixion. It is very, very interesting then. Jesus would have had to have died specifically on Wednesday and not Friday if we want to deem that this text, this narrative, has any historical connotation and synchronicity with the movement of the earth in relation to the sun and how we have our days and nights. But specifically, we find them now cramming 3 days and 3 nights into Friday and Sunday to develop what they call their crucifixion and resurrection, all to harmonize into the procession of the earth into the equinox, finding the ancient Easter tradition, which was evolved into the Norse culture from the ancient Kemetic tradition. It's something that you have to take time, you have to look at the Bible and be able to read and understand. specifically that books like even Ezekiel, you see, if you want to look as far back as even Ezekiel, the practice of Easter, Ishtar, were already being practiced, you see, as our descendant traditions of Set and Osirian initiation have already spread and proliferated throughout the earth. It's very interesting if you look specifically in the book of Ezekiel chapter 8. I want to leave you with this last quotation so that you really see the implication of this tradition. You see, and when we're talking even about Easter, what is East? East. Look to the east. What rises in the east? The sun rises in the east every morning, you see, because the earth, as it's moving on its ecliptic plane, its rotation is counterclockwise on its tilted axis. And its movement on its ecliptic plane around the sun is also counterclockwise. It's very interesting, you see. So when you actually understand the movement of the earth in outer space, all of it has to also harmonize with these teachings. And as the earth is turning in that particular movement and the sun remains stationary, the side that turns into the darkness now is what now is experiencing the rotation of the transition from daylight into evening. And that's why you would say now the sun is setting in the west. But the side that is now receiving and coming out of the darkness, which is turned away from the sunlight and into the facing the sun's rays, is experiencing now the morning and the day. And that is the portion that we would instead say now is experiencing its sunrise, and that is the location of the east. And because it's turning counterclockwise, that is the location of the movement of the east. You see it. And if you're someone who's very clean in reading the scriptures, you would see that according to the old legends, you see, because we see that the Bible and the teaching of even who they call Shem and the descendants of Abraham gives them a Sumerian genealogy and heritage, that the legend of what they're calling even Easter is represented in the Bible and is practiced and borrowed into the Hebrew tradition because of the interaction that they had with the other Sumerian tribes, because they're all Semitic people essentially settled in that area. And according to the old legends, after one deity called Tammuz was slain, you see, they say that he descended into the underworld, but specifically through the weeping of his mother, Ishtar or Easter, who was equivalent to the Queen Semiramis. He was mystically revived in spring. That's where we get this whole idea of Easter and the sun and its counterclockwise, the earth and its counterclockwise movement and its rotation. And the resurrection of Tammuz specifically already was practiced through Ishtar's grief with 40 days of weeping that was dramatically represented annually in order to ensure the success of the crops and the fertility of the people. Each year men and women had to grieve with Ishtar over the death of Tammuz and celebrate the god's return in order to win anew her favor and her benefits. When the new vegetation began to come forth, those ancient people believed their savior had come from the underworld, had entered winter, that transition, of course, moving from the December months, or what would have been their coldest climatic conditional period, moving to its warmer, increasing in intensity of duration of daylight. See, that's actually what's happening in the atmosphere. When they're experiencing this, they would know that their deity, their savior, has come back. And even if you read inside the Bible in Ezekiel chapter 8 verses 14, there's a reference to that, how Ezekiel talks about how he's taken up in a vision, and he's shown how the women were weeping for Tammuz in that particular verse. So when I'm talking about Tammuz as an entity, as a deity, as an archetype, which was recognized by these Sumerian tribes, which were outside of the Hebrew or the Israeli or the Jewish people, they kept this practice, and this deity I'm talking about is even mentioned inside the Bible, so that you can synchronize it to see that what we bring to you in spirituality is the holistic cultural understanding of how the Bible is created, with these references to these mythological entities, gods or archetypes, and the mythology of which it's based upon is developed, so that as we trace it to you now, even coming into today, at that time with the weeping of Tammuz, Tammuz had his relationship to Ishtar in this pageant or tradition, with 40 days of what would have been a Lent or weeping period, or a preparation and expectation for the Ishtar, the Easter, or the resurrection of the rebirth of the crops. Now they've just taken Jesus Christ and imposed on it, my people. That was the intention and logic of bringing together this discourse, looking at the 3 days and 3 nights, tying it now as a very clear, comprehensive explanation to a greater degree of what we were able to prepare in our sequences of discourse for our Ministry of Youth to channel inside this space and duration. Because I mean, as you know, as we're doing our work here, following editorial policy, we are going to be keeping into sequence with the contemporary events going on in the community, in the world, breaking news issues. Of course, you know that that's what generally does always guide the content that we definitely do want to always produce, so that you get relevances to the teachings and knowledge, of course, which we're able to expound here. I mean, you're looking at it very just as clear there. There was weeping for Tammuz with the Sumerians, but when you come now to our ancestors, you see it. We had the Wepet Renpat festival, which also opened up, and I mean, they were practicing that probably as early as at least 3150 BCE in the Nile River area, going down to even as early as around the Nile Bulale. You know, that's the Lake Victoria area. You know, we always recognize around water bodies they've always been very rich cultures that had to base their cosmologies on the climatic relationships of the effects and regional fluctuations they'll have because of the environment in relation to all of this. Because like I said, we're on a planet and it's moving. That's what's making rain, hail, snow, earthquakes, my people. It's not no Jesus Christ. You see, it's not some mystery God. So that's where I'm going to go ahead and round up, truthfully, like we pointed out. You see, this has been a very interesting discourse. I hope that you really did get the message. And if you got the message, then that's good. You see, you're going to enjoy the rest of this year, which started on March 20th specifically. That was actually our first day here in our naturalist tradition, so you can go ahead and mark that on your calendar, and go ahead and mark off on your equinoxes. That's how I'm going to go out. You see, mark off on your solstices. You see, note that this year, our new year started March 20th, 2021, and you see the astrologists, astronomy, you know what I'm saying, the people who will be gazing at the sky, essentially, because that's where you get into the knowledge of God, and it has to also tie with you being able to liberate your soul into astral projection. I'm going to go ahead and leak that out since I'm just cramming in this knowledge at the last minute. You know that at the very end of these recordings, it's important you listen to the very end, because we sneak in some of these secrets. You see, very prime knowledge, just to juice you up. Make sure you listen to the end. And on June 21st, 2021 this year, is going to be the summer solstice. You're going to have your autumnal equinox, Wednesday 22nd, 2021. And December 21st, 2021, you're going to have your winter solstice this year. You can go ahead and mark those dates and key them in. You know that normally you're going to have your Halloween always on October 31st. That marks, you know, typically the day that is just given as a buffer marker for the end of the harvest period, which is essentially what the September autumnal equinox does designate, that we are now coming to the period in which the Earth is going to start moving away from its closest proximity to the sun, which was allowing us to have substantial warmth inside it, allowing us to have the an increase in rains, the planting season, essentially, as we do call it. So we should instead be working towards harvesting the crops that you do have available now, storing them up for what is going to be the cold and winter period, which is going to now pass as we pass that September autumnal equinox. You see, because that's, like we say, that's the point that marks an equal day and equal night. Because actually now the days are actually going to continue to get shorter, and the nights are going to instead continue to get longer until we get to December 21st, which is the day of the winter solstice. And it's from that day now that the days instead now start to get longer, and the nights start to instead get shorter, and our sun's magnetism starts to increase on the earth again, and then we start to get more heat. So actually, as from where we are now, that it's April, know that we are still inside the rainy spring season, transitioning towards May. So we're actually experiencing a period of the Earth's rotation in its ecliptic plane around the sun, in which we are in good proximity to the sun. That's why we have a lot of warmth and heat on the Earth. And recognizing at last, even with the 23.5 degree tilt in the Earth's axis as it's rotating, you're going to see that actually we are in a location where it is going to be the southern hemisphere that's generally being pointed away from the sun. So you see that in the tropical regions of Africa, we're not going to actually experience the high temperatures that the northern region is actually going to be experienced, but that's why we have a temperate, balanced climate right now, which we are experiencing rain in certain regions. We know, like I said, this is also our planting season shared with the north region, because the tilt in the axis and the balancing of the sun's light now specifically is falling with some balance more to the topic of Cancer. So like I said, now I'm just throwing this knowledge inside there so that if you're able to follow it and see its sequencing with what we've explained about the equinoxes and solstices and Easter as this year is beginning right now, then you should be able now to be able to plot now throughout the rest of the year how this naturalist phenomena is manifesting in your environment. Also looking at the calendar so that when you start to see all of this, like I told you, December is going to at last reach, and you'll realize this, that wow, this is very interesting. And if you store your resources knowing that you should be planting now, harvesting around September, October, not spending crazily through the January New Year, which is fake, and the Christmas period, which is fake. That's why when I'm supposed to celebrate those things, you see it, because they're pageantries for a false god called Jesus that did not exist. You're supposed to be instead harmonizing with the natural cycle of the earth. So even what are the creatures of the planet doing? The bear is going to sleep and hibernate during that period. Certain animals are going to store up food also during that period. When we were naturalists, what they called pagans, we instead would store up food during that period. So now that we don't have this agrarian culture anymore, that we are forced now to actually plant our food, and our money now is our sweat and labor. You're not supposed to go into the dark period of the earth when we're not even supposed to be able to plant, because the fertility of the earth is down, and instead extravagantly spend your resources. So though there's supposed to be some excitement at the period of the Saturnalia that the sun and its nativity is coming back, there's no reason to go to the excess that we see demonstrated with the splurging and gifts and the pomp and the drunkenness and all of that. That's really unnecessary, especially in these contemporary times, my people. So really, I hope that you've been able to really assimilate this knowledge truthfully. If you didn't get it, and now I'm throwing in these bonus points, go truthfully, it means that this ministry is just not for you. And if you gonna hate on it, you gonna hate on it. This work's just not for you. But for those of you who are able to get it to the end truthfully, I know that this is what we're doing, and I hope you've been able to appreciate it. And I know that, like I say, if you didn't, and you were able to say follow this video, or you're just getting this video and you've got that point, and you're like, yeah, this is good, then go ahead, make sure you do click like, make sure you do share this audio recording, and make sure that you of course subscribe to this channel, because like I say, we got deep content like this. And deep is rich, and I know that you'll be able to follow it. It's giving you your organization and synchronicity to the value of this teaching that they call Easter in a different light, even if you are a Christian or not. And you can, like I said, use that with your soul's development as you increase and produce on this earth. You see it. So I've been your naturalist minister, the Nkatla of Bafut, Nkatwi Fokwambe, initiator of the Ministry of Spiritology and director of the association, dropping these minutes, you know what I'm saying, like I pointed out, is a segment that we're going to be delivering to you regularly from the Ministry of Spiritology's YouTube channel, Minutes with the Minister, and we've been talking about the 3 days and 3 nights of the supposed crucifixion and resurrection of the mythological character Jesus Christ from the New Testament and what's called the Christian Bible, essentially. So that's where we're going to be out, people. You got that message. You all keep love, and remember, everything moves in motion and harmony and mechanization with those who proceed with their left foot forward, with their heart moves forward on the basis of respect of their conscience before my heart. Peace profound. Peace.